Hey, the other day I was sitting at work, staring at a part that I needed to track down. I knew exactly what I had to do. So what I do instead? I clicked over the news, got another cup of coffee, and told myself, I'll get to it in a few minutes. Sound familiar? In this episode, I chat with therapist Steven Melman about what's really going on with procrastinate. We dig into why it's not laziness and how fear and perfectionism shows up and how our kids are watching even though we don't think they are. It's funny. It's real. It might just help you get moving again. Next on the podcast. Let's do this.
Welcome to the No Sitting on the Sideline Dad podcast, a podcast about a journey of discovery and conversations about not sitting on the sideline of life. Let's get involved. Here's host Joe Foley.
Hey, welcome back to the podcast. My name is Joe Foley, and I'm very, very, very grateful you're here today. Your first time? Welcome to the podcast. Hey, before we get started, I would love it if you would head over to nocityonthesideline.com and sign up for the newsletter. It's just so you can keep up to date with up-to-date episodes, guests, conversation, anything we mention in this episode, you'll get that in the newsletter. Also, you might find the conversation really, really fun. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about something most of us wrestle with every day, procrastination. My guest, Steven Melman, is a longtime psychotherapist with deep insight into why we put things off and how to get moving again in a healthier, more intentional way. Whether you're stuck on a task or just feeling overwhelmed, who isn't nowadays? This one got some powerful takeaways and is a great conversation. So let's jump into the interview. Welcome to the podcast, Steven.
Thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, one thing we're going to talk about tonight, I want to let it out of the bag. I got one thing I'm procrastinating, and it's kind of sad in a way too. My Christmas tree's still up.
Well, hey, you're ready for next year. You're actually ahead.
I might actually put some bunnies on it and put some Easter eggs around it, so it'll be the Easter tree instead of the Christmas tree.
There you go. That would work as well.
Well, I figured that would be kind of a funny thing to start off with. Basically, we're going to talk about procrastination this evening. And there's one thing I'm curious about. What are the biggest lies we tell ourselves when we procrastinate?
It's not important, perhaps. I can delay it and there's no cost. Yeah.
But is there a cost, though? What is the cost?
It can be lots of things. Oftentimes there's some sort of penalty, punishment, feelings of guilt, missing deadlines, and maybe perhaps if you're employed, you're now in trouble with your supervisor or your spouse.
I was kind of curious about procrastination, though. Is it a way of coping with something and coping with emotions or anything like that?
It can be, but if we talk about coping skills, some of them are healthy ones and some of them aren't so healthy. And oftentimes they get ingrained, they become habits, whether they're good ones or not.
What are some healthy ones?
Healthy ones would be avoid procrastination. And I think all of us can have a tendency to procrastinate. It's how we deal with it. And so let me just share with you, I often say the older we get, the more we have learned about ourselves, how introspective we can be if we choose to be. And as we're doing so, we're finding out what works for us and what doesn't work. What I have found that works for me is if I can attach some sort of punishment and reward at the same time. So if there's something that I'm procrastinating on in the morning and I go, well, around lunchtime, I'm going to get hungry. So I can only do lunch, but only if I attend to the tasks that I have a tendency to procrastinate on.
Well, it's interesting you said that because like give yourself a reward. Like I'm going to have that sandwich at noontime and stuff like that. And it makes me wonder too, is like, we have that fear of that thing we need to get done, like procrastinate about it. I'm like, I'll do it in 5 minutes. I'll have a cup of coffee in 5 minutes. But is it better to just take action and get it done? Because maybe it's like I think the reward would be awesome on the other side.
Yes. I'm a big believer in attaching rewards. It sort of like takes me back to my childhood when my parents would say to me, do your homework first and then go out and play.
What was it like for you growing up, and did you experience procrastination?
Even though that was my go-to, my parents were on top of it, and so they helped to instill self-discipline, and that has aided me throughout my life, both personally and professionally.
Well, it's interesting too. I was thinking about procrastination too and the psychological effects on it too. Does perfectionism play in it too?
Oh, it can, absolutely. And I attach all kinds of things when we talk about perfectionism. And I'll suggest to folks let go of that because it's unattainable. There's no such thing as perfection. Whatever you think is perfect, there's something even more near perfect. What we're seeking is much more something like acceptance rather than if I'm trying to be perfect. I often will say on a given day, oftentimes we're dealing with more than one task. If we were only dealing with one task, it could be near perfect, but that's not life.
That's true. That's true. And I think about that. Do people get stuck? And when they think about that, when they go, I can't do it, it's not going to be perfect.
Sure. Yes. And as if I'm dealing with a client, yes, we're talking about that, about how to lower the bar from perfection to acceptance. And I'm going to do the best instead of a perfection. How about I'm going to do the best I can in every endeavor, but letting go of those expectations of perfection.
Well, another thing I was thinking about too, and I thought procrastination sometimes confused with laziness. Is that true? Because I think sometimes people they procrastinate like, that guy's just being a lazy person. But is laziness and procrastination, do they have something in common or are they different?
I guess with every individual, if I'm playing the role of a psychotherapist, I'm not making any judgments or any assumptions. I will certainly want to explore what's behind that procrastination.
But how do you explore that? I was kind of curious.
Well, you certainly would say there's all kinds of reasons for why we procrastinate. We just talked about perfection. We talked about the worrier, the
Mhm.
one who's always engaging in what ifs. So I can attach or I can discuss any one of those. If I just to digress for a moment, if I'm talking about the what ifs, I always try to say to people, you can always go down those rabbit holes of what ifs. And they always tend to go in a negative direction. So instead, I'll say, how about instead of what ifs, how about if we decide to engage in facts? If they're not facts, they're assumptions, they're conjectures, but they're not facts. If a new set of facts presents themselves, now we'll deal with the new facts, but without going into those negative what ifs.
But do you think sometimes what ifs hold people back?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. It's like, and it can immobilize people,
What do you mean by
that it keeps them from making a decision.
do you think a lot of people deal with that? Like sense making a decision, come almost like frozen in time because they can't
Absolutely. And that's
can't
what I meant. Yes. Frozen in time.
is it also a childhood experience? Could something like that be an emotional influence procrastination later in life? Because
It,
maybe
it,
something they learned from their parents or something?
it could be, or something that they often, we were talking about habits earlier, and sometimes they get ingrained. And so again, if I'm playing the role of a psychotherapist, I'm helping them to let go of things that are not healthy for them, and in place, find healthier coping skills.
What are some coping skills people can do to help with procrastination?
One of the things that I always do, have done for ever since I was in college, and even probably before that, is making a to-do list, a task list every single morning. And so I'm semi-retired and I still do that. But we also use oftentimes a to-do list or task list when we're going to the grocery store. Before we go to the grocery store, what do? We're making a grocery list.
Well, it's definitely interesting too. I always heard that story. If we don't have it like a to-do list, it's like directions, like the roadmap for the day. And
Mm-hmm.
if we don't, we're just like a boat circling around in circles and not
Exactly.
going anywhere. What are some ideas for to-do lists? Like, do we use apps? Do we write it on a note? What are some ideas how somebody could do that?
Well, I'm old school, so everything for me is on paper and pen, and it's always next to me on my desk. It always works when I use it, whatever that is, and it stops working when I stop using it. Again, whatever you find that is that helps you to accomplish your. We're going to talk about goals. Helps you to accomplish the goals for the day.
Well, that's definitely interesting too. Do you think it procrastinate spills into everyday life too? Like you said, just mentioned goals and stuff like that. Does it spill over into everyday life?
It can, sure, sure. So
Could,
let me before I forget, let me tie these three things about procrastination, time management, and so if we're procrastinating, we're not making the most use of our time. And by procrastinating, not making the most use of our time, that certainly can be and is stressful.
Well, it's definitely interesting too to make the best use of our time and stuff like time management. And that's so important too because we all of us now we have this thing called the cell phone, the smartphone, and that could be a time suck right now. I would say a time thing pulls time away from us. So be kind of is it really important to be smart with your time?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And find time wasters. Somebody starts a task and they're trying to find something on the internet. And then they start wondering about the emails. And then they find a story about their favorite movie stars. I was looking at that. You can easily get pulled the 10 best Western movies, whatever draws you away from your task at hand and how to stay self disciplined.
Well, I find that interesting. Mention think about that. I hope my boss is not listening, but is like today and at work, we had a situation where I got to look up some missing inventory. And I really don't want to deal with this part because it's a pain in the butt to deal with it. So I get distracted and watch the news. But I think I'm procrastinating, not doing what I'm supposed to be doing because maybe I don't want to deal with it.
Right? Right. And then that's where a task list can help you with. And it's every time you're wanting to get pulled away or distracted from your task at hand, your task list helps you refocus.
Well,
Go ahead.
refocus. Yeah, it's interesting too. I think about that for a second, and especially in families, like parental procrastination. That could be a big deal too, because I think that could be important, especially when you have kids.
Yes, yes. And of course, we as parents are role models to our kids about those kinds of things we've been talking about, how to be self disciplined, how to focus, how to re engage, how to prioritize, how to reward ourselves for avoiding procrastination. Sort of like you eat your meal before you have your dessert. You do your homework before you go out and play. And so those things that we learned as children can actually help us into adolescence and adulthood, going from living at home to now all of a sudden we have the freedom of when we're in college and how to maintain that self-discipline we were taught, perhaps, hopefully.
Well, and teaching self discipline is that very important? I mean, obviously, it sounds very important, but how important is that to show parents show the kids the importance of self discipline?
Oh, I think it's extremely important. That can also help with self-esteem, accomplishing goals and self-discipline and feeling good about yourself and your accomplishments, your ability to set and accomplish goals. Absolutely.
How would somebody set goals if they're like a chronic procrastinator? What are some tips maybe that person can, like, set goals and follow through with them?
Actually, so that's a good question. And what it tends to happen sometimes when we procrastinate, we don't want to accomplish a goal if we think the goal is too lofty. Imagine there's two people and they're talking about taking 1,000-mile trip.
Hmm.
And one person sitting on the hood of their car and then they're complaining about how long it's going to take to get there and how tired they're going to be, and they're already talking themselves out of it even before they get behind the wheel to start the trip. The other person is talking about, gee, this is the 1,000-mile trip. I've never been here before. I can map out my route. Things would be a pleasure to view. I can pack my favorite songs. If I'm traveling with somebody, we don't have to be quiet. We can converse with each other. And if we're driving by interstate, the interstate has a mile marker every mile. And so the mile markers stack up upon themselves. And so talking about lofty goals, but instead what we're going to do is we're going to focus on short-term goals, short destinations, and then reward ourselves for having to accomplish that goal. If we're talking about long-term goals to short-term goals, we're talking about increments, small increments. It's like a no-brainer to accomplish from one goal to the next. Well, I can do that. All right, well, then do that. And the next one is just a small distance away from the previous one. And again, they stack up upon themselves. Another good example is if you're seeking a 4-year degree, 4 years seems a long time, but you're just going to focus on one class at a time and not focusing on the 4 years, but one semester at a time, one week at a time. Eventually, they stack up upon themselves, and before you know it, you've accomplished your goal.
That's interesting. I've heard that before, like small little baby steps to builds upon one thing, builds upon the next thing, and until you finally reach the destination, which I think is an awesome way of dealing with it.
And if you imagine yourself, we're putting blinders on so you can't see too far in peripheral vision and you can't see too far in front of you.
Well, that's definitely interesting too, because we're always looking, oh man, it's so far away. That final destination's so far away.
That's why we're going to focus on know what the end result is going to be, the lofty goal, but we're going to stop focusing on that because it can be debilitating. Just as you said, it's so far out there. So stop focusing on it and instead focus on how we can reward ourselves for accomplishing shorter goals.
Well, it's interesting. We talked about how to set up goals, how to write like to-do lists and stuff like that. But when we get that all going, and sometimes we may fall into like, procrastination habits of old habits. How do we avoid that? Like, what do we do? Is something we can use or some kind of method we can use to snap us back into, the right way?
Sure. Okay. So you may have heard this that it takes 21 days of doing something every day or near every day for that new thing to become a habit. So if you're practicing whatever it is, I'm going to walk every day. As you walk for 21 days, that now has become a habit. If you're writing a task list every day, 21 days, you've gotten the habit of making a task list. Whatever it is that you're wanting to let go of unhealthy habits in place of new, healthier habits, having that concept of going to do something every day for 21 days for that new thing to become a habit.
Oh, definitely interesting too. I mean, I've heard that like seven times. Somebody has to see something 7 times, say it 7 times, do it 7 times, and then becomes and stuck in your memory, ingrained in your memory, and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We can go not to go too far, but why is it that we're introduced to someone and how quickly we forget their name?
It's true though, because how many times you do somebody to forget their name? But it's interesting, and I wanted to tell you a funny thing about that is when I used to my job now, I used to deliver mail to people in one of our buildings. And one way to remember somebody's name, I give everybody a nickname. And one guy was named Hair Club for Men, so I remember his name. Everybody had a nickname, so I remember. I wanted to tell that funny story because when you introduce somebody, you want to remember the names, and I
Yes.
give them nicknames.
Sure. It works. It's called mnemonic devices.
Oh, that's
Ways of,
interesting.
yeah. One way to remember somebody's name is to repeat it.
Okay.
Well, nice to meet you, Joe. Upon departing, it has been a pleasure meeting you, Joe. I hope to run into you again, Joe. The
Oh,
more you repeat it, the more you're helping it to be ingrained. And just as you said, if there's something about you, Joe, that I could remember, so that next time I see you, I go, oh, yeah, in my mind, I remember this about Joe. And that also helps.
I never told the guy that. I thought it was the Hair Club for Men guy, but but it was kind of something so I could remember who he was, and that was my way of remembering the person's name.
Sure.
It's also true of the mental health part of it, the mental health about procrastination. And I think that's very important too, because we talked about the lessons parents showing examples to kids and stuff like that. We talked about the to-do list and stuff like that. But what is the mental health aspect about it?
Well, we talked about some of the mental health aspects. Of the more we procrastinate, the more it could chip away at our self esteem, self confidence. It could lead to anxiety, depression, fear of failure,
Mhm.
even fear of success. There's all kinds of how it could tap into the mental health by procrastinating.
You mentioned the fear of success. What is that like? What do you mean by that?
Well, if I'm procrastinating because I'm fearful of succeeding, I'm trying to think of a good example. I we talked about things so far away from us. I don't think I'll ever succeed at that. So why even bother?
Because somebody would never know if they didn't try, and
That's
then
right.
take a step and take a leap of faith and try something.
And yet, though, that leap of faith or trying, well, what happens if I don't succeed? And how much effort is it going to take to put forth that effort? And what's that going to be like? And they're already talking themselves out of it even before they ever begin.
Well, when you're talking about that, it was interesting. I was thinking about that myself. Is as a parent myself, if I was thinking like that, and what an example of I'm setting for my son or my child, that they won't take a leap of faith and try something new to
That's
see if they
right.
like it or not because they're looking at me going, yeah, dad doesn't
Hmm.
take chances. Why should I?
Yeah, that's right. And to think of our kids are human sponges, they are observing us all the time. And if there's something we're struggling with, they may struggle with it too.
Well, it's definitely interesting too. And the fear of success, you know, I always tell my son, I know about this one thing. Nobody cares about you in the sense, nobody in the world cares about you in the sense that everybody thinks about themselves. They're more worried about themselves than they're more worried about you.
Yes.
So,
And that reminds me, if I make a mistake in a conversation, somebody's going to remember that forever. All night, I'm not going to be able to live with myself because it's a mistake I made. That's a false assumption. Most people are going on with their life. They've got their own responsibilities, raising kids, all that to be wrapped up around you and the mistake you made.
well, it's interesting too. My son's going through the period right now in the middle school. So everything's larger than life. Everything problems sneeze the wrong way and it's larger than life. And so it's an interesting time for him. As an adult, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what people think of me in the sense that I think it can also hold people back too, because they fear of not trying out something new. Well, also too, I think that why do you think there's the stigma around this too? People openly discuss procrastination as a mental health problem because I think it is important to talk about because something I think that somebody need to deal with in order to succeed in their lives.
Yeah. You talked about stigma. I wouldn't want to say it's a mental health problem so much. You could say it gets ingrained, it's a habit. If we said bad habits as a driver, would we say that's a mental health problem? Hopefully not. Sometimes we get in bad habits of drivers, not making a complete stop for a stop sign. So that's not a mental health problem that got just ingrained. And so I would want to help people with procrastination and not say, I wonder how that's a function of how you were raised. Or as a therapist, I say, I'm not so interested in what happened to you as a child. I would say, think of our childhood as part of our life. That's part one. And the other part of our life is adulthood. So no matter what happened to us as children, we couldn't change that. But we now have, as adults, the capacity to make any changes we want to.
Do you think that sometimes our childhood does play a part in our adult life, though? Our childhood experiences
It,
carry over into adulthood?
it could. There's lots of things I could say that could affect me as a child. I don't want to be a slave to my childhood. To
Mhm.
say that, gee, because this happened to me as an adult or as a child, that the die is cast.
What is that?
Meaning that already, so I'll go ahead and just share. So it's part of my personality. When I was growing up, though, my parents said this to me about me all the time, how stubborn I was. Well, what did I know? I was 6 years old. Until I learned in school later on that there's synonyms for every single word. And so I learned, gee, I'm not stubborn, I'm persistent. Yes. And that persistence has helped me, that tenacity has helped me get through life. So I go one step further to say when somebody says something I can't do, I'll say, gee, I wish you hadn't told me that, and I got to prove you wrong.
I love that. I love that people said, you can't do that. That's silly. Why are you trying to do that? I think sometimes it motivates people to do it more.
Exactly.
I'll
So
show you.
yeah, I'll show you. Furthermore, I struggled in school, and my parents took me to a child psychologist and was given all these tests. And the child psychologist came back to my parents and said, "If your son graduated from high school, be proud of him because we don't think he can go much further than that because this is what our tests show."
Oh,
And so,
wow.
and that was part of me. That's my personality to say, "Watch me, watch me defy you."
It's almost like it feels like a little bit of anger too, a little bit like
A
I'll
little
show
bit.
you.
Yeah. Yeah. Let that anger help you to set goals. Go back and then I said about sponges. So
Mhm,
imagine yourself as a sponge.
mhm,
And when it comes to absorbing emotions, it's okay to absorb positive emotions, positive energy as a sponge. But
mhm.
it's not okay to absorb negative energy and negative emotions as a sponge. When you find yourself absorbing negative emotions from guilt to jealousy to anger, ask yourself in that expression, how's that working for me? And to
Oh,
say, it's not. So you want to imagine yourself wearing a shield on your arm and you want to deflect those emotions, that negative energy away from you. And like a laser beam, focus on what your goal is. And that's me. Instead of getting angry at somebody, I'll say, let my anger help me to accomplish my goals in a positive way.
Definitely too. I think the whole thing about procrastination, I think, is taking action and setting goals. I think that's probably the biggest way of dealing with it and stuff like that. But I had a quick question. I was kind of curious. Can you share any stories, something that, of people really interesting, surprising reasoning why they are procrastinators?
Oh, gosh. I was looking at this before we began. I was looking at all the different types of procrastinators. We talked about the perfectionist. We haven't talked about the dreamer. The dreamer sometimes is overwhelmed by too much information. There's the avoidant personality that they experience stress and feelings of inadequacy. There's an overdoer. There's crisis maker. There's worrier. There's the anxious procrastinator, the busy procrastinator, the thrill seeker. So with each one of those, it's taking a look at, so why is the individual that's in front of me as a client perhaps, what's going on? How does it tap into their type of procrastination? Once I establish that, then we can deal with, okay, so this is your go-to in procrastination. Now let's talk about setting and accomplishing goals that you can accomplish.
Well, definitely too. I mean, I didn't realize there's many different kinds of procrastinators. The one that two of them I'd like to touch on, if we have time to do it, is the dreamer and the avoidance. The one.
Mm-hmm.
What is the dreamer procrastinator? What is that about?
Okay, so it's the person who's overwhelmed by too much information. They have too many choices and they skip out on anything that appears difficult or distressing.
How does somebody well, obviously set goals, but how does somebody overcome that?
Well, again, if we boil it down and we start talking about the choices they have, and so that the choices are not so overwhelming to them. And so taking a look at, instead of stressing about the choices, it is good that we have choices rather than we don't have any choices and we're forced to comply or whatever. I think choices oftentimes are good. It's just how we process them.
Well, but is it true though? We live by our choices though. Sometimes the choices we make our lives better or can make our lives worse.
Sure. Hopefully not to feel pressure to make a rash decision or a rash choice, to take time so that you research them.
No, the research one, the dreamer, the too much information can make a person paralyzed.
It could. How you deal with that? I would help the person how to make the information your ally rather than the enemy with too many choices.
Well, it's definitely like too many choices, too much information. Nowadays, with the invention of AI and stuff like that, it's amazing how much information we get thrown at us, especially when we're trying to look up something like a trip or a new career they want to start or stuff like that. There's so much information; it's hard to make decisions. No, the other one I want to touch base on, the avoidance one. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's really interesting too.
Okay. So the avoidant often experiences heightened stress and feelings again of inadequacy, which can exacerbate their reluctance to engage in tasks. So if I'm dealing with, before I deal with procrastination, I might be helping them with building their self-esteem, taking a look at what kinds of things, again, as a habit of how they talk to themselves. Boy, I can go in all these different directions. Once upon a time, I heard this: to treat yourself as you would your own best friend. And what you would say to your best friend, and why is it when it comes to ourselves that we don't practice that? We talk to ourselves in very negative, punitive ways, and how we say, "You stupid imbecile." Well, why would we want to say that to ourselves?
We could be really mean to ourselves and stuff like that, and that's
Absolutely.
negative self talk. And I didn't realize how much that can play into procrastination.
And I'm glad you said that about self-talk. One of the things that makes us human is that, yes, we do talk to ourselves. And then pay attention to what our self-talk sounds like. Is it uplifting toward building our self-esteem, or does it chip away at it? Every negative self-talk, the opposite. For every negative self-talk, there's a positive in its place. So you could say, and this is a good thing, as I get older, yes, there are things I want to improve about myself, but I'm a whole lot better. I'm feeling better about myself with the goals I have accomplished than when if we were given the choice of going back in time and to repeat something that happened in our, I don't know, third grade. And you might be in a hurry to say, well, yeah, I wish I could repeat that. I would do things so much differently. And I go, well, wait a minute. You can only do that only if you can take your present wisdom with you. If you weren't able to take your current wisdom with you, you're apt to make the same mistakes you did the first time around. Oftentimes, I look in the mirror and I go, who's that old man looking back at me? But along with how older I look in the mirror, along with that has come wisdom and the things I thought I knew when I was younger, and how I only thought I knew and then, and how much wiser I am today.
Definitely interesting too, because I wish I could go back in time in my third grade time and speak up and have a conversation and answer questions. Because
Mhm.
when we take that as we come further into adulthood and stuff like that, I think our life experience plays a lot in that.
Sure. But then you have to go back in time and imagine what it was like when you were an 8-year old or whatever it was and what was going on with you. We often say, well, gee, if I'm 55 years old today, I go back in time to the 8-year old. Well, wait a minute. You got to go. What was the 8-year old dealing with? Maybe we're brought up that you respect authority figures. Now when we're 55, we can go back in time and how to balance between being respectful and being diplomatically assertive. But what did we know about being diplomatically assertive at the age of 8 or whatever age?
Well, I mean, sometimes I feel like sometimes what we experience as adult and the problems and mental situations, especially procrastination, it's like I feel like some of the stuff is ties back to when we were kids.
It could be if you allow it to.
Hmm.
This is me talking. I think all of us have a tendency to remember what it was like when I was in my childhood or my adolescence or things I struggled with. Maybe it's overly used, but how they could be character builders. Gee, I wouldn't want to have to go through that again. Having had gone through it, it certainly has helped me deal with current stressors. I can say, the stressor I'm dealing with today isn't half as bad as the one I dealt with 20 years ago. And if I have developed healthy coping skills, it can be a template of what to use today that's going to help me to deal with current stressors in light of how I dealt with them in the past in healthy ways.
Well, it's definitely interesting too. I think some people avoid, especially with stresses, like with stuff that's really like high conflict issues and stuff like that.
Well, and that can be healthy too of how we deal with conflicts,
Hmm.
hopefully in healthy ways. Some people avoid. We were talking about how to avoid procrastination. Well, some people avoid conflicts too.
I was just thinking about avoiding conflicts and stuff like that too, in the sense that we don't want to deal with it because it's really high conflict and a lot of emotions behind it sometimes too.
Sure. It would be a mistake to say, gee, I've gone through my last conflict. I'll never have to go through another one for the rest of my life.
And no, no, not as long as you're breathing, there'll be some issue in the conflict you might have to deal with.
We will have to somewhere in the future, there'll be another one. So the healthy person is the one who finds a way of dealing with conflicts again in healthy ways, have learned healthy coping skills.
Well, it's definitely interesting too. I learned a lot about procrastination tonight, and I really appreciate the conversation we shared tonight. But wrapping up, I kind of one thing we maybe not covered, or maybe one thing you want to leave with the audience about overcoming procrastination.
It sounds like a broken record, but every person has to introspectively find what's working for them, what has worked with them in other ways. If we not talk about procrastination, but we talk about something they have attained as a strength and how they accomplish that. So then you can take that as an example and say, I can deal with procrastination, what I have known about and learned about myself. And I constantly say this about me. What do I know about myself? And what would work for me in dealing with whatever it is? If we're talking about procrastination, how to accomplish self discipline. So I'll just share this one quick story. Everybody has their pandemic story. And I'm working from home and I established the self discipline. I had my go to place where I turn on my computer for work. It was right after breakfast. And I would turn my computer on, and it would take about 20 minutes to not download, but to establish the apps and turn everything on. I'm having my cup of coffee, and by the time 7:30 rolls around, I'm working. I'm starting work, and I'm structured. I'm disciplined. I know when I'm going to have lunch. I know when I'm going to finish. So that's my self discipline. I had an aspiration of writing a book. But I was always too busy to write it when I was employed. So when I became retired, within a week of retirement, I said, I got no more excuses why I can't write the book. And very much like I did after breakfast every single morning for 2 hours, I sat down in front of a computer and just started writing, just started typing until I couldn't think of anything else to say for that day. And my brain was always rolling around. So tomorrow, what am I going to address tomorrow? I would skip around from one chapter to the next, and then they started filling themselves in. But that self-discipline of writing every single day really helped.
Well, definitely too. And like you said before in the beginning of the conversation and stuff, is like building on little small steps, building to the final destination.
Yes.
I was just kind of curious, what is your book too? The book for the clinicians for the chaotic world?
Yes. So I had belief that the graduate school did not provide us a confidence or competence as we were taking our graduate school classes, and then we graduated and they go, okay, now you're ready to do these different things. And I said to colleagues, so if you didn't feel like the graduate school provided you this, how long did it take you? And all of us had about the same length of time. It took us about 3 years. And that medical model that said, thou shalt do no harm. My first clients, I know I didn't harm them, but I don't know how successful I was with them either. So the book was because I researched it and I said, no one has ever written a book like this before. And first and foremost, it was written to help new clinicians, but people who read it who are not clinicians have said, I found the book very inspiring and motivational. You took the things to help, tips from how to help marital couples or how to help people who are struggling with depression or anxiety or procrastination or stress management, whatever it was with the topics I addressed, they were helpful even to people who are not clinicians.
Well, definitely interesting too. And that sounds like an interesting book, especially with all the different topics about the marriage and procrastination and stuff like that. Steven, where can they connect to you, find more about your book and more about you?
Okay, so I have a website, but then it's the website is Steven Steven, my last name Melman Melman, psychotherapist psychotherapist.com. And on my website, you'll find information about me as a clinician and the book that I've written. And if you so feel obliged, it shows you where you can purchase the book, the Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you purchase books online, you can find my book there. The name of the book, one more time, is Guidance for New Clinicians in a Chaotic World, How to Practice Your Craft While Preserving Your Traditional Values.
Steven, thank you much for being on the podcast. All links will be in the show notes for this episode. Thank you for your time. It was a good conversation. I appreciate you. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Joe. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Well, that's wrapping up with this episode of the No Sitting on the Silent Down podcast. Hey, a big thanks to Steven Melman for joining me today. We didn't just talk about procrastination. We peeled it back. Looked at where it started, how it messes with our heads, and why not always about being lazy. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's old habits. And here's the truth. Not everything in life has a quick fix. True. But we get to choose what we do next. One step, one decision, one list. That's how change starts. And as a parent, what we model matters. If our kids see us stuck, scared to act, drowning in self-doubt, they learn that too. But if they see us trying, even when we don't feel ready, they learn how to move forward. You can find all the show notes over at nosittingonthesideline.com/161. That's where you can find links to connect with Steve, leave a comment, and join the conversation. And remember, procrastination doesn't define you. What you choose to do next, that's what really counts. Until next time, give your kids a hug. Tell them how much you love them. Call a friend just to say hello, because connections matter. Until next time, God bless. See ya.